There are moments in life when hunger becomes more than just an empty stomach. It becomes a monster that sits in the corner of a cold room, watching a mother count coins that will never be enough. It becomes the silent scream that echoes through sleepless nights when a child cries for food that isn't there. And sometimes, in the darkest of these moments, it becomes the force that pushes a human being to stand at the edge of their own dignity, ready to trade the last piece of themselves for one more meal, one more day, one more chance for their child to survive. This is not a story about heroism in the traditional sense. This is not about someone who had everything and chose to give it away. This is about a woman who had nothing left except her body, and a child who knew nothing except that his stomach hurt. This is about the kind of desperation that most people will never understand, the kind that makes you willing to become something you never imagined, just so someone you love can eat. But this is also a story about something else. Something that reminds us that even in our worst moments, when we've convinced ourselves that the world is cold and every person is out for themselves, there are still souls who see beyond what's offered. There are still people who understand that true strength isn't in taking what's given, but in giving what's needed. What happens when a woman walks into a diner with her last shred of hope, prepared to sell the only thing she has left? What happens when a stranger sees not an opportunity, but a human being in pain? What happens when kindness shows up in cowboy boots and a weathered face, speaking softly in a way that says, "I see you, and you don't have to do this"? This is that story. And it begins on a rainy Thursday evening in a small town in New Mexico, where the smell of coffee and fried food mixed with desperation, and where two lives collided in a way that would change everything. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the dirt parking lot outside Ruby's Diner into a mess of mud and puddles. Sarah Mitchell sat in her 15-year-old Honda Civic, watching the water run down the windshield in rivers, distorting the neon sign that blinked "Open" in red letters. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles had gone white, and in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days, her 4-year-old son Danny slept fitfully. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes, trying to find the courage to walk through that door. 20 minutes of listening to the rain hammer against metal, 20 minutes of feeling her stomach twist itself into knots, 20 minutes of telling herself that she had no other choice. The math was simple and brutal. She had $17 to her name. The motel wanted $40 for another night. Danny hadn't eaten anything but half a gas station sandwich in 2 days, and that was because the clerk had felt sorry for them and let her have the day-old food for free. Sarah was 28 years old, though the mirror told her she looked closer to 40. The past 3 years had carved lines into her face that shouldn't be there yet. Her blonde hair, once thick and shiny, hung limp and unwashed around her shoulders. Her clothes were clean but worn, jeans with holes that weren't fashionable, and a sweater that had belonged to her mother before she died. She had been pretty once, beautiful even, back when she was in high school, and boys used to write her notes, and her biggest worry was whether she'd make the cheerleading squad. But that girl was gone, buried under the weight of bad decisions, worse luck, and the kind of poverty that grinds you down one day at a time until you barely recognize yourself anymore. Sarah's husband, if she could even call him that since they'd never actually gotten married, had left when Danny was 6 months old. Just walked out one morning while she was feeding the baby, and never came back. She later heard he'd moved to California with a woman he'd met online. He never sent money, never called to check on his son, just vanished like he'd never existed at all. For a while, Sarah had managed. She worked 2 jobs, cashier at a grocery store during the day and cleaning offices at night. Her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, watched Danny for almost nothing. It wasn't a good life, but it was a life. They had a small apartment, food in the fridge, and Danny had toys from the thrift store and clothes that mostly fit. Sarah was tired all the time, exhausted down to her bones, but she was making it work. Then the grocery store closed. The big chain that owned it decided the location wasn't profitable enough. And just like that, 60 people lost their jobs. Sarah tried to find something else, but there wasn't much in their small town in southern New Mexico. She applied everywhere, fast food, retail, even the meatpacking plant 40 miles away. But either they weren't hiring or someone else got there first. The cleaning job alone wasn't enough to cover rent and everything else, and the math stopped working. First, she lost the apartment. Then Mrs. Chen, as kind as she was, couldn't watch Danny for free anymore because she needed to pay her own bills. Sarah and Danny moved into her car, parking in different places each night to avoid the police who didn't like people living in vehicles in their town. She sold everything that wasn't absolutely necessary, Furniture, dishes, her laptop, even her mother's jewelry. It hurt to let go of those pieces. The necklace her mother wore on her wedding day, the earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. But Danny needed to eat more than Sarah needed sentiment. The cleaning job lasted another 2 months before the company brought in a new manager who wanted fresh blood and didn't like that Sarah sometimes smelled like she'd been sleeping in her car, which of course she had been. After that, it was just odd jobs here and there, holding signs for going out of business sales, cleaning someone's garage for $20, anything she could find. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. 2 weeks ago, Danny got sick. Just a cold, probably, but it scared Sarah half to death because she couldn't afford to take him to a doctor and she didn't know if it was something worse. She spent most of their remaining money on children's medicine from the drugstore and juice boxes because the label said they had vitamin C. Danny got better, but the money was gone, and now here they were. Sarah looked back at her sleeping son. Even in the dim light from the diner's sign, she could see how thin he'd gotten. His cheeks, once round and full, had hollowed out. His arms looked like sticks. He was wearing a jacket 2 sizes too small because it was all they had, and she could see his wrists sticking out of the sleeves. He should be in preschool, learning his letters and playing with other kids. Instead, he spent his days in the backseat of a car, asking when they could go home and when they could have pizza again like they used to. The guilt was a physical thing, a weight that pressed down on her chest until sometimes she couldn't breathe. She had failed him. She was his mother, the one person who was supposed to protect him and keep him safe and make sure he had what he needed. And she had failed. Every time he said he was hungry, every time he asked why they couldn't sleep in a bed, every time he cried because he was tired and cold, it felt like someone was driving a knife into her heart. Sarah had thought about the shelters, but the nearest one was 50 miles away and always full. She'd called 3 times and they told her the same thing. There was a waiting list and it could be weeks before a spot opened up. She couldn't wait weeks. Danny needed food now. He needed a warm place to sleep now. And that's what had led her here, to this parking lot, to this decision that made her want to vomit. She had noticed the man 3 days ago at a different diner in the next town over. She'd gone in to use the bathroom and fill up Danny's water bottle when the waitress wasn't looking, and she saw him sitting in a corner booth. He was older, maybe mid-50s, with a large belly and eyes that lingered too long on the teenage waitress when she brought his coffee. Sarah recognized that look. She'd seen it before. In bars, in the grocery store, on the street. It was the look of a man who saw women as things to be used. She'd walked past his table and felt his eyes follow her. When she came out of the bathroom, he was still there, and this time he spoke. Asked her if she needed anything, said she looked like she could use a hot meal. Sarah had said no thank you and left quickly, but his words stayed with her. She looked like she could use a hot meal. And the way he'd said it, with that little smile, she knew exactly what he meant. She knew what he was offering and what he expected in return. For 3 days, she tried everything else she could think of. She went to churches, but they only did food banks on certain days, and she'd already used up her monthly allotment. She tried asking for day work at construction sites, but the foreman just laughed. She even, and this made her face burn with shame even now, tried asking for money outside a grocery store, but the manager threatened to call the police and she had to leave. And all the while, Danny got hungrier. His complaints turned to whimpers and then to a terrible quiet that was somehow worse. This morning he'd told her his tummy didn't hurt anymore, and Sarah knew that wasn't because he wasn't hungry. It was because his body was giving up, adjusting to starvation the way human bodies do when they have no choice. That's when she made the decision. She'd driven back to that diner, the one where she'd seen the man, hoping he'd be there again. And he was. Same booth, same coffee, same predatory eyes. This time when he offered to buy her a meal, she said yes. And when he suggested they could go somewhere more private after, somewhere they could get to know each other better, she'd forced herself to nod, but he wasn't there tonight. Sarah had waited in the parking lot for an hour watching people come and go, and he never showed up. Maybe he only came there certain days. Maybe he'd found someone else already. Maybe it was a sign from God that she shouldn't do this. Though Sarah had stopped believing in signs or God or anything else that suggested the universe gave a damn about people like her, she was about to start the car and drive away when she saw the man walk into Ruby's diner. Not the man from before, but a different man. This one was tall and lean, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair going grey at the temples and skin that spoke of Native American heritage. He wore jeans, work boots, and a canvas jacket, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Sarah watched him through the rain-streaked window as he took a seat at the counter. A waitress, young with bright red hair, brought him coffee without him having to ask. They talked for a moment, the girl laughing at something he said, and Sarah felt a wave of desperation so strong it made her dizzy. She didn't know this man. She didn't know if he was kind or cruel, generous or selfish, but he was here, and Danny was hungry, and she was out of options. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah opened the car door and stepped out into the rain. The cold water soaked through her sweater immediately, and she gasped at the shock of it. For a moment she just stood there, rain running down her face, mixing with tears she didn't remember starting to cry. Then she made herself move, one foot in front of the other, across the parking lot and through the glass door of the diner. The warmth hit her like a wall, and the smell of food made her stomach clench so hard she had to pause and breathe through it. Coffee and bacon and something baking, bread maybe, or pie. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning maybe. A package of crackers she'd found in the glove compartment. She couldn't remember. The diner was small, maybe a dozen tables and a long counter with red vinyl stools. The floor was black and white checkered tile, and the walls were covered with old photographs of the town, back when it was bigger and more prosperous. There were only a few other customers, an elderly couple in one booth and two truckers in another, and the man at the counter, looking at her now as she stood dripping in the doorway. Sarah forced herself to walk toward him. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. The waitress looked at her with concern, probably wondering why she was so wet, but Sarah ignored her. She focused on the man, on his dark eyes that watched her approach with an expression she couldn't quite read. When she reached him, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, Sarah opened her mouth to speak. She'd practiced the words in her head 100 times, some version of "I need help," or "My son is hungry," or "My son is hungry," or maybe just cutting straight to the point and asking if he wanted company. But what came out was, "I'll do anything." 3 words. Small and broken and desperate. 3 words that contained everything: her fear, her shame, her love for her son, her willingness to destroy herself if it meant he could survive. 3 words that hung in the air between them while the man looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the wet hair and worn clothes, but something deeper. He didn't smile. He didn't leer or let his eyes travel down her body the way she'd expected. Instead, he gestured to the empty stool next to him and said, in a voice that was quiet and steady, "Sit down." Sarah sat, perching on the edge of the stool like a bird ready to fly away at any moment. Up close, she could see the details of his face, the lines around his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his jaw was set in a firm line. He smelled like wood smoke and something herbal, sage maybe. His hands, wrapped around his coffee mug, were rough and calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them. "What's your name?" he asked. The question surprised her. She'd expected something else, some negotiation about price or location, not this simple request for her name. "Sarah," she said, and her voice came out scratchy from not being used much lately. "Sarah," he repeated, like he was testing how it sounded. "I'm Thomas Begay." He paused, then asked, "Have you eaten today?" The kindness in the question almost broke her. Sarah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Thomas turned to the waitress, who'd been hovering nearby, trying not to obviously eavesdrop. "Jenny, can you bring us 2 of the day's special and a kid's meal, whatever's good? Make it all to go." "Sure thing, Thomas," Jenny said, and headed toward the kitchen. Sarah stared at him, confused. "I don't understand." "You said you'd do anything," Thomas said, turning back to her. "Right now, what you're going to do is sit here and drink some coffee while Jenny makes up some food. Then you're going to take that food to whoever's waiting for you, because I'm guessing someone is." His eyes flicked toward the parking lot, toward her car, and Sarah realized he'd probably seen Danny in the back seat. "I can't pay you," Sarah said, and she hated how her voice shook. "Not with money." Thomas's expression hardened slightly, but not with anger. With something else, something that looked almost like pain. "I'm not asking you to pay me with anything. I'm buying you dinner because you look like you need it. That's all." "That's not all," Sarah said, and now the tears were coming for real, hot and fast down her cheeks. "You don't understand." My son, he's so hungry and I don't have anything left. I don't have money or a job or a place to live. I have nothing except—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at her body, at the only thing left she could trade. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah watched his face, trying to understand what he was thinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I understand more than you think, and I'm telling you, you don't need to do that. Not tonight. Not with me. Not with anyone." "But no buts," he said, cutting her off. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to eat. Your boy's going to eat. And then we're going to figure out what comes next." He paused, then added, "If you'll let me help." Sarah wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt, but life had taught her to be suspicious of kindness, especially from men, especially when she had nothing to offer in return, except the thing they always seemed to want. She whispered, "Why would you help me?" Thomas looked down at his coffee, and when he looked back up, there was something in his eyes that Sarah recognized because she'd felt it herself. Grief, old grief, worn smooth by time but never really gone. "Because someone helped me once, when I had nothing," he said, "and because it's the right thing to do." Before Sarah could respond, Jenny came back with 3 containers stacked on top of each other, steam escaping from the edges. The smell made Sarah's mouth water so intensely it almost hurt. Thomas pulled out his wallet and handed Jenny some bills, waving away the change. Then he handed the containers to Sarah. "There's chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans in the big ones," he said. "Chicken tenders and fries in the small one." And Jenny threw in some pie because she's good like that. Sarah tipped the containers with shaking hands. They were warm, wonderfully warm, and heavy with real food. More food than she and Danny had seen in weeks. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," Thomas said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, slightly bent at the corners. "This has my number. Tomorrow morning, you call me. We'll talk about what you need, and we'll figure something out, okay?" Sarah looked at the card. It said Thomas Begay, carpenter and general contractor, with a phone number underneath. She looked back at him, searching his face for the catch, for the moment when he'd tell her what he really wanted. But all she saw was a tired man with kind eyes who seemed to genuinely want to help. "Okay," she whispered, clutching the food and the card like they were the most precious things in the world, which in that moment they were. Thomas nodded. "Good. Now get that food to your boy before it gets cold." "And Sarah?" He waited until she met his eyes. "You're going to be okay. I don't know how yet, but you are. I promise you that." Sarah couldn't speak. She just nodded, and then she was moving, walking fast toward the door, out into the rain that didn't feel quite so cold anymore. She ran to the car and yanked open the back door, sliding in next to Danny, who was stirring awake. "Mama?" he said, his voice small and sleepy. "I've got food, baby," Sarah said, opening the containers with fumbling fingers. "Real food. Chicken and potatoes and everything." Danny's eyes went wide, and Sarah watched as he grabbed a chicken tender with both hands and bit into it like he was afraid it might disappear. She wanted to tell him to slow down, to chew carefully, but she couldn't because she was doing the same thing, shoving mashed potatoes into her mouth, barely tasting them, just needing to fill the emptiness inside. They ate in silence, broken only by small sounds of satisfaction, and for the first time in longer than Sarah could remember, the terrible, gnawing fear in her stomach eased just a little. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see the diner, warm and bright, and she could see Thomas, still sitting at the counter, his shoulders relaxed, drinking his coffee like he hadn't just saved 2 lives without even knowing it. Sarah looked down at the business card in her hand, at the name and number that represented something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. Not much of it, and maybe it wouldn't last past tomorrow, but it was there, small and fragile and real. She tucked the card carefully into her pocket and held her son while he ate. And for that moment, that single perfect moment, they were okay. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She and Danny finished the food from the diner, carefully saving some of the chicken tenders and half the pie for breakfast. Then she wrapped him back in the blanket, held him close, and listened to the rain gradually fade to a drizzle, and then to nothing. Through the car window she could see stars appearing between breaks in the clouds, small points of light in all that darkness. Her mind kept circling back to Thomas Begay and what had happened in the diner. She'd gone in there prepared to sell herself, ready to do whatever she had to do to get money for food. She'd crossed a line in her head, made peace with becoming someone she never thought she'd be. And then this stranger had looked at her with those steady dark eyes and refused to let her do it. He'd fed them instead, asked for nothing in return, and given her a phone number like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah had learned not to trust easy kindness. In her experience, people who helped always wanted something back eventually. The neighbor who'd loaned her $20 and then expected her to babysit his kids for free. The guy at the gas station who'd let her use the bathroom and then followed her outside asking for her number. The world had taught her that nothing came without a price, especially not for people like her, people who'd fallen through the cracks and had nothing left to trade except their dignity. But Thomas hadn't looked at her that way. He hadn't looked at her like she was less than human, or like she owed him anything. He'd looked at her like she was a person who needed help, and helping was just what you did. Sarah didn't know what to make of that. It didn't fit with what she knew about how the world worked. Danny stirred in her arms, making a small sound in his sleep. Sarah looked down at his face, peaceful now with a full stomach, and felt her chest tighten with love so fierce it was almost painful. He was everything. Her whole world, her only reason for keeping going. She would do anything for him, absolutely anything, and she'd proven that tonight by walking into that diner ready to destroy herself if it meant he could eat. But maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to. Morning came slowly, the sun rising over the desert hills and turning the sky pink and orange. Sarah watched the colors change through the windshield while Danny slept on. She'd parked behind an abandoned gas station on the edge of town, a spot she'd used before where no one bothered them. As the light grew stronger, she could see the full extent of their situation in a way the darkness had hidden. The back seat of the car was packed with everything they owned. 2 garbage bags of clothes, mostly Danny's because he was still growing and needed them more, a plastic bin with some dishes and utensils they'd saved from the apartment, a few of Danny's toys, the ones Sarah couldn't bring herself to sell, a stuffed rabbit he'd had since he was a baby, and some cars he liked to roll across any flat surface. Her own possessions fit in a single backpack, spare clothes, a toothbrush, the few photos she had of her mother. This was their life now. Everything they had in the world could fit in a 13-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and an engine that made concerning noises. Sarah had thought she'd hit rock bottom when they lost the apartment, but she'd learned that rock bottom was deeper than she'd imagined. There was always further to fall. Unless maybe there wasn't. Unless maybe Thomas Begay meant what he said. Sarah waited until 8 in the morning, figuring that was a reasonable time to call someone on a Friday. Not too early, but not so late it seemed like she'd forgotten. She pulled out the business card in her phone, which had 5% battery left because she couldn't charge it anywhere. Her hands shook as she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. Thomas Begay. "It's Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "From last night. At the diner." "Sarah," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Good morning. Did you and your boy eat well?" "Thank you. We saved some for today." She paused, not sure how to continue. "You said to call? Are you somewhere we can talk? Somewhere safe?" Sarah looked around at the abandoned gas station, at the broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Safe enough. "All right. Here's what I'm thinking. I've got a property about 15 miles outside of town. Small place where I store tools and materials for my contracting work. There's a trailer on the property. Nothing fancy, but it's got electricity and running water and heat. It's been sitting empty for a few months now. You and your boy could stay there while we figure out your next steps." Sarah's heart started beating faster. "I can't pay rent. I'm not asking for rent. I'm offering you a place to stay." Thomas's voice was patient, like he was explaining something simple to someone who was having trouble understanding. "No strings attached. You need shelter. I've got shelter. That's all there is to it." "What?" "Why?" Sarah asked, and she hated how broken her voice sounded. "Why would you do this for strangers?" There was a long pause. Then Thomas said, "My sister had a little boy. When he was about your son's age, she fell on hard times. Her husband left. She lost her job. Same story you hear 1,000 times. She was too proud to ask for help, thought she could handle it on her own. One night, in the middle of winter, her car broke down on a back road. She and my nephew tried to walk to town. They didn't make it." His voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the pain underneath it. "I found them the next morning. They'd frozen to death less than a mile from a house where someone could have helped them." Sarah closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. "I'm sorry, every day." Thomas cleared his throat. My point is, I can't help my sister anymore, but I can help you. And I'm going to if you'll let me. No one should have to choose between their dignity and feeding their child. No one should have to sleep in their car when there's a warm bed available. It's not right, and I won't be party to it if I can do something about it. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but she barely noticed them. What if I mess up? What if I can't find work or I let you down? Life is messy, Sarah. People struggle. That doesn't mean they don't deserve help. It means they deserve it more. He paused. Will you let me help you? She thought about how much easier it would be to just keep driving, to not let this kind man get involved in the disaster that was her life. She thought about all the ways this could go wrong, how she could fail him the way she'd failed at everything else. But then Danny woke up, rubbing his eyes and asking if they had any more of that chicken. And Sarah knew she didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. Her son needed a roof over his head and regular meals and a chance at a normal life. If Thomas Begay was offering that, she'd be a fool to refuse. Yes, she said. Yes, please. We'll take the help. Good, Thomas said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. I'm heading out to the property now to make sure everything's working. Can you meet me there in an hour? I'll text you the address. I'll be there. After they hung up, Sarah sat in the car for a few minutes, just breathing. Then she helped Danny change into clean clothes from one of the garbage bags, gave him the leftover chicken tenders and a juice box she'd been saving, and ate some of the pie herself even though her stomach was in knots. She brushed Danny's hair with her fingers and tried to make herself look presentable, though there wasn't much she could do without a shower or clean clothes. The address Thomas texted her led to a dirt road that wound up into the hills outside of town. Sarah's car struggled with the incline, the engine whining in protest, but it made it. After about 3 miles, she saw a mailbox with Begay painted on it and turned onto an even narrower road. The property appeared around a bend, and Sarah's first thought was that it was beautiful. Not fancy or expensive looking, just beautiful in the way wild places are. It was a small house, more of a cabin really, made of wood that had weathered to a soft grey. Next to it sat a trailer, older but well-maintained, with blue trim around the windows. Behind the buildings, red rock hills rose up against the sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Thomas's truck, a dark green Ford that had seen better days but still ran strong, was parked in front of the trailer. He got out when he saw her car, raising a hand in greeting. Sarah parked next to him and took a deep breath before opening her door. Morning, Thomas said. He looked at Danny, who was peeking out from behind Sarah's legs, and smiled. And you must be the young man I packed those chicken tenders for. What's your name, son? Danny looked up at Sarah for permission. She nodded and he said shyly, Danny. Good to meet you, Danny. I'm Thomas. He crouched down to Danny's level, not getting too close, just making himself less intimidating. Do you like trucks? He loved trucks. Any kind of vehicle, really. Before they lost the apartment, he used to line up his toy cars and trucks and make elaborate roads out of books and boxes. Well, I've got a bunch of them around here. Work trucks mostly, but maybe later we could take a look at them if your mum says it's okay. Can we, Mama? Danny asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Maybe, Sarah said, her throat tight. Let's see the trailer first. Thomas stood and led them to the trailer door, pulling out a ring of keys. Like I said, it's not much. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, bathroom, with a shower. I used to let my workers stay here sometimes when we had big jobs out this way. Haven't used it in a while, but I came out yesterday afternoon and cleaned it up, made sure everything works. He unlocked the door and stepped back, letting Sarah go in first. The trailer was small, maybe 20 feet long, but it was clean and dry and warm. The main space held a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, small sink and mini fridge, plus a table with 2 chairs and a worn couch. Through a narrow doorway, Sarah could see a bedroom with a double bed and a bathroom beyond that. There's sheets and blankets in the closet, Thomas said, pointing. Fresh ones I brought from my place. Towels in the bathroom. The heat works off propane and the tank is full. There's some basic food in the cabinets, canned stuff mostly, but enough to get you started. Sarah walked slowly through the space, touching the countertop, the back of the couch, the doorframe to the bedroom, making sure it was real. It was small and old and the carpet was stained in places, but it was a home. 4 walls, a roof, a door that locked. More than she'd had in months. The water comes from a well, Thomas continued. It's good water, safe to drink. Electricity runs off a generator, but I'm having solar panels installed next month. I'll show you how to work everything.
He paused. What do you think?
Sarah turned to look at him, this stranger who was giving her everything without asking for anything in return, and the word stuck in her throat. Finally, she managed, "It's perfect."
Good.
Thomas smiled, and Sarah noticed how it changed his whole face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Let me show you how the heat works and where the generator is in case you need to reset it." For the next half hour, Thomas walked Sarah through the basics of the trailer, how to light the stove, where the shutoff valve for the water was, how to work the temperamental shower. He showed her the propane tank outside and explained how to check the level. He pointed out the main cabin, which he said was his workshop, and told her she was welcome to come over if she needed anything. "There's no cell service out here," he said. "But the trailer has a landline. It's an old rotary phone, but it works." "My number's written on the pad next to it, and the number for the local clinic and emergency services. If you need anything day or night, you call." "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said. "You don't need to thank me. Just take care of yourself and your boy." Thomas looked at Danny, who was exploring the trailer with wide eyes, opening cabinets and looking under the couch. "He seems like a good kid. He is the best." Sarah's voice cracked. "He deserves better than what I've been able to give him. He's got a mom who loves him enough to do anything for him. That's worth more than you know." Thomas headed toward the door. "I'll let you get settled. I'll be in the workshop most of the day if you need anything. Otherwise, I'll check in tomorrow. Bring some fresh food." "Thomas," Sarah called as he reached the door. He turned back. "Why did you clean this place yesterday? Before I even called? Had a feeling you would. And if you didn't, well, it needed cleaning anyway." After you left, Sarah stood in the middle of the trailer and felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was like. Safe. She felt safe. The fear that had been her constant companion for months. The fear of where they'd sleep and how they'd eat and what would happen next. It eased just a little. "Mama, there's a bed!" Danny called from the bedroom. A real bed. Sarah went to the bedroom and found him bouncing on the mattress, laughing in a way she hadn't heard in far too long. She sat down next to him, and he climbed into her lap, wrapping his thin arms around her neck. "Are we going to live here?" he asked. "For a while," Sarah said, not wanting to promise more than she could deliver. "Is that okay?" "It's the best place ever," Danny said seriously. Then, "Mama, why are you crying?" "'Cause I'm happy, baby." And she was, terrified and overwhelmed and not sure how any of this was really happening, but happy. They had a place to live. They had food in the cabinets. They had someone who cared enough to help without expecting anything in return. It wasn't a permanent solution. Sarah knew that. She still needed to find work, needed to figure out how to get back on her feet, needed to prove that Thomas's faith in her wasn't misplaced. But for today, for right now, they had what they needed, and that was enough. Over the next few days, Sarah and Danny settled into the trailer. Thomas came by every morning with fresh groceries, things like milk and bread and eggs, produce, meat for the freezer. He always knocked and waited to be invited in, respecting their space. Sometimes he'd stay for a few minutes to make sure everything was working. Other times, he'd just drop off the food and leave. Sarah tried to refuse the groceries at first, tried to say it was too much, but Thomas just looked at her with those steady eyes and said, "Let me help, please." So she did, though it went against every instinct she had. She spent the time cleaning the trailer until it shone, organizing their few possessions, playing with Danny in the yard where he could run and shout and be a child again. She let him help her cook simple meals on the 2-burner stove, and they ate together at the little table like a normal family. At night, she tucked him into the big bed and lay down next to him, listening to him breathe, marveling that they were warm and fed and safe. On the 4th day, Thomas knocked on the door in the late morning and asked if Sarah had a minute to talk. She invited him in, offering him coffee that he accepted. They sat at the table while Danny played with his toy cars on the floor. "I've been thinking about your situation," Thomas said. "You need work, right?"
Yes, Sarah said.
"I've been looking online when I can, but there's not much around here, and without a permanent address or references. What if you worked for me?" Sarah blinked. "Doing what?" "I need someone to help with the business side of things. Answering calls, scheduling jobs, keeping track of materials and invoices. It's gotten too big for me to handle alone, but not big enough to need a full-time office. You could work from here, use the landline, maybe 15 or 20 hours a week to start. It's not much, but it's something. Thomas, you don't have to give me a job out of pity. I'm not, he said firmly. I genuinely need the help. Been putting it off for months because I hate paperwork. If you don't want to do it, that's fine, but don't say no because you think I'm being charitable. This would actually help me. Sarah looked at him, trying to gauge if he was telling the truth. She saw nothing but sincerity in his face. What about experience? I've never done office work. Can you answer a phone and write things down? Yes. Then you've got all the experience you need. The rest I can teach you. Thomas pulled out a folder from the bag he'd brought. Here's what I'm thinking. You work however many hours you can manage. I pay you $15 an hour, cash every week. When you're ready, we can make it official with taxes and all that, but for now, let's keep it simple. $15 an hour. Sarah did the math in her head. Even at just 15 hours a week, that was over $200. Enough for food and gas and starting to save. Enough to breathe. Okay, she said. Yes, I'll do it. Good. Thomas slid the folder across the table. These are the jobs I've got scheduled for the next month. I need you to call these people and confirm the dates, then organize the information in a way that makes sense. There's a desk in the corner of the workshop you can use, and an old filing cabinet. It's a mess right now, but that's why I need you. They spent the next hour going over the basics of Thomas's business. He did carpentry and general contracting, everything from building decks to remodeling kitchens to fixing roofs. Most of his clients were in the surrounding towns, people who'd worked with him before and trusted him. He had a good reputation, he explained, for being honest and doing quality work, but he was terrible at keeping records. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. It felt strange to be talking about work, about normal things, like she was a normal person with a normal life. But it also felt good, like maybe she could be that person again someday. When Thomas left, Sarah looked at the folder of information and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. She had a job, not a great job, not a career, but honest work that would pay enough to start rebuilding. It was a beginning, small and fragile, but real. That afternoon, while Danny napped, Sarah made the first phone call. Her hands shook as she dialed the number, and her voice was unsteady at first, but she did it. She confirmed an appointment for a deck repair and wrote down the details in careful handwriting. Then she made the next call, and the next, and with each one she felt a little more confident. By the time Danny woke up, she'd confirmed all 6 appointments and started organizing the information in the filing cabinet. It wasn't much, a few hours of work, but she'd done it. She'd taken the first step toward being self-sufficient again. That evening, Sarah sat on the trailer's small porch and watched the sun set over the red hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Danny was inside, drawing pictures with crayons Thomas had brought, happy and occupied. The air was cool but not cold, and somewhere in the distance Sarah could hear a bird singing. She thought about where they'd been a week ago, sleeping in the car, hungry and scared and desperate. She thought about walking into that diner ready to sell herself for meal money. And she thought about Thomas Begay, this quiet man who'd looked at her in her worst moment and decided to help instead of taking advantage. Sarah didn't believe in miracles. She'd seen too much of the world's cruelty to think that God or fate or the universe intervened to save people. But she believed in kindness. She believed that sometimes, when you were at your absolute lowest, someone might reach down and pull you up. Not because they had to, not because they expected anything in return, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Thomas had given her more than shelter and food and work. He'd given her back her dignity. He'd treated her like a human being deserving of respect when she'd forgotten how to see herself that way. And that, more than anything else, was what was going to save her. Sarah didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she'd be able to make enough money to get her own place someday, or if Danny would ever have the normal childhood he deserved. She didn't know if she'd be able to repay Thomas for everything he'd done, or if she'd find a way to break the cycle of poverty that had swallowed her whole. But she knew this. Tomorrow she'd get up and make breakfast for her son. She'd make her phone calls and organize her files and do the work Thomas had trusted her with. She'd take care of Danny and herself, and she'd take it one day at a time, building something stable and real from the ruins of what had been. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. 3 months passed before Sarah truly understood what Thomas had given her. It wasn't just the trailer, or the job, or the regular meals, though those things had literally saved their lives. It was something deeper, something that took time to recognize because Sarah had been so broken when she arrived that she couldn't see it at first. Thomas had given her the space to become herself again. The work started slowly. Those first few weeks, Sarah spent 3 or 4 hours a day making phone calls, organizing files, learning the rhythm of Thomas's business. He was patient with her mistakes, and there were plenty of them. She double-booked a client once, forgot to order materials for another job, mixed up addresses so that Thomas drove to the wrong house. Each time, he just shrugged and said, "We'll figure it out," and they did. But Sarah didn't make the same mistake twice. She created systems, color-coded folders for different types of jobs, a calendar where she tracked everything in careful detail, lists of suppliers and their phone numbers. The old desk in Thomas's workshop became her command center, and she took pride in keeping it organized, in knowing exactly where every piece of information was. The money helped. Oh God, did the money help. That first week's pay, $225 in cash. Sarah counted it 3 times to make sure it was real. She bought groceries, real groceries, fresh vegetables and fruit and meat that wasn't on sale because it was about to expire. She bought Danny new shoes because his old ones had holes in the soles. She put $20 in an envelope and hid it in the trailer, the beginning of savings, of a cushion between them and disaster. By the second month, Thomas had increased her hours to 25 a week, and Sarah had started taking on more responsibility. She negotiated better prices with suppliers, something Thomas admitted he'd never been good at. She set up a simple bookkeeping system so they could track expenses and income. She even designed business cards on the library computer and had them printed at the copy shop in town. "You're good at this," Thomas told her one afternoon, looking over the neat spreadsheet she'd created. "Better than I expected, honestly. I like making sense of things, putting them in order. You've got a head for business. Ever think about doing something more with that?" Sarah had thought about it late at night when Danny was asleep and the trailer was quiet. She'd thought about going back to school, maybe taking online classes in business or accounting. She'd thought about the future in a way she hadn't been able to before, when survival took up all her mental energy. But thinking about something and doing it were different things. "Maybe someday," she said. "Right now, I'm just focused on keeping what we have." Thomas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's smart. Build the foundation first." The foundation was getting stronger. Danny had gained weight, his cheeks filling out, his legs getting sturdy instead of stick-thin. Sarah had found a church that ran a free preschool program 3 mornings a week, and Danny loved it. He came home talking about his friends, about the stories the teacher read, about painting and singing and playing in the playground. He was becoming the happy, energetic child he should have always been. Sarah herself had changed too. She'd put on a few pounds, not much, but enough that her clothes fit better and her face didn't look so gaunt. She'd gotten her hair cut at a training school in town where students practiced on real people for cheap, and the young stylist had shaped it into something that looked intentional instead of neglected. Small things, but they added up to someone who looked like they had their life together, or at least like they were working toward it. But more than the physical changes, something had shifted inside Sarah. The constant fear that had been her companion for so long was fading. She still worried, of course. Worried about money and the future and what would happen if the car broke down or Danny got sick. But it wasn't the all-consuming terror it had been. It was normal worry, the kind everyone has, not the kind that keeps you up all night calculating how many meals you can make from a can of beans. Thomas remained a steady presence, checking in regularly but never intruding. He taught Danny how to use basic tools, supervised while the boy hammered nails into scrap wood, and felt like he was building something important. He fixed Sarah's car when the check engine light came on, refusing payment, saying he had the parts lying around anyway. On particularly cold nights, he invited them to have dinner at his cabin, cooking simple meals of stew or chili or roasted chicken. Sarah learned things about him gradually. He was 43, never married, though he'd come close once. He'd learned carpentry from his grandfather, who'd been a master craftsman known throughout the reservation. His sister's name had been Maria, and her son was called Joseph. He still visited their graves on the anniversary of their deaths, bringing flowers and sitting there for hours. "Do you ever stop blaming yourself?" Sarah asked him one evening. They were sitting on his porch while Danny played in the yard, and the conversation had drifted to loss and grief. Thomas was quiet for a long time. "No," he said finally, "but you learn to carry it differently. At first it's this crushing weight that makes it hard to breathe. Then it becomes part of you, heavy but familiar. You don't forget, you just keep moving forward with it. Is that why you helped us? To make up for not helping them?" "Maybe at first," Thomas admitted, "but not anymore. Now I help because you needed it and I could give it. It's that simple." Sarah wanted to tell him that it wasn't simple at all, that what he'd done was extraordinary, that he'd saved them in every way a person could be saved. But Thomas didn't seem comfortable with grand declarations, so instead she just said, "Thank you for everything." He smiled at her, that rare smile that made his whole face soften. "You're welcome. For everything." As autumn turned to winter, Sarah started making plans. Real plans. The kind that extended beyond next week or next month. She'd been setting aside money every week, and she now had almost $1,000 saved. It wasn't enough for first and last month's rent on an apartment. Not yet, but it was a start. She'd also been looking into community college courses, business administration classes that she could take online while still working for Thomas. But more than that, she'd been thinking about the future in a different way. Not just survival, but building something. Maybe her own business someday. Bookkeeping for small companies or administrative support. She was good at it. Thomas had said so, and others had too. The suppliers she called regularly now asked for her specifically, said she was more organized than any contractor's assistant they'd worked with. It was a strange feeling, having ambition again. For so long, Sarah's only goal had been making it through the day, but now she could think about next year, about where Danny would go to kindergarten, about whether she could save enough for a reliable car, about the person she wanted to become instead of just the person she was trying not to be. One cold December morning, Thomas asked Sarah to come to his cabin after work. He had something he wanted to discuss, he said, and his tone was serious enough that Sarah felt a flutter of worry. Had she done something wrong? Was he going to ask them to leave? Had she been stupid to think this arrangement could last? But when she arrived, Thomas was relaxed, sitting at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee already poured. He gestured for her to sit, and Sarah did, her hands wrapped around the warm mug to steady them. "I've been thinking," Thomas started, "about the business, about the future. I'm not getting any younger, and the work is getting harder on my body. My knees aren't what they used to be, and my back complains after every big job. Are you shutting down the business?" "No, nothing like that. The opposite, actually." Thomas leaned forward. "I want to expand. Take on a partner. Someone who can handle the business side while I focus on the actual work. Someone I trust." It took Sarah a moment to understand what he was saying. "You mean me?" "I mean you. You've turned the administrative side of this business around. We're more profitable than we'd been in years because you negotiated better rates and stopped me from making stupid mistakes. Clients love you because you're professional and organized. You have a real talent for this, Sarah. But I've only been doing this for a few months."
I don't know enough.
"You know more than you think, and what you don't know, you can learn. I'm not talking about making you a full partner tomorrow. I'm talking about training you, teaching you the business, giving you more responsibility over time. Eventually, maybe in a couple years, we make it official. Begay and Mitchell Contracting." Sarah stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "I can't afford to buy into a business. I'm not asking you to buy in. I'm asking you to earn in. You work, you learn, you prove yourself, and when the time is right, I sign over part of the business to you. No money down, just your time and effort."
That's not fair to you.
Thomas shrugged. "Life's not about fair. It's about doing what's right. And this is right. I need someone I can trust to keep this business going after I can't do the physical work anymore. You need a stable future for you and your son. We can help each other." Sarah's throat was tight with emotion. "Why are you doing this? Because you've earned it. Because I see how hard you work, how much you care, how you never take the easy way out. Because you're good at this, and you deserve a chance to build something that's yours." Thomas paused. "And because Maria and Joseph never got their chance." "But you can. And I want to help you take it." Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now, but she didn't care. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes. Say you'll think about it. Say something other than no." "Yes," Sarah whispered. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever known. I won't let you down." "I know you won't." Thomas smiled. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like. They spent the next hour discussing the future. Thomas would start teaching Sarah the construction side of the business, not so she could do the physical work, but so she understood it. She'd learn to read blueprints, understand building codes, estimate job costs accurately. She'd take over more of the client relations, the bidding on new jobs, the scheduling and management. In a year, Thomas wanted her name on the business cards. In 2 years, if everything went well, he'd start the legal process of making her a partner. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. Sarah had gone from living in her car to potentially owning part of a business in less than 4 months. It didn't seem real. It didn't seem possible. But Thomas was looking at her with complete confidence, like he had no doubt she could do this, and maybe that was enough. That night, after Danny was asleep, Sarah sat at the small table in the trailer and thought about how far they'd come. She thought about that rainy night in the diner, about how desperate she'd been, about the choice she'd almost made. She thought about what her life would look like now if Thomas had been a different kind of man, if he'd taken what she'd offered instead of seeing what she needed. She thought about all the other women out there right now, sitting in their cars with hungry children, trying to decide what they were willing to sacrifice for survival. She thought about how many of them would meet men who would take advantage instead of helping, who would see opportunity instead of another human being in pain. And she thought about what she could do about that. The idea came slowly at first, just a whisper in the back of her mind. But over the next few weeks, it grew stronger, more defined. Sarah started researching, looking up information on transitional housing, on programs that helped women and children in crisis, on the gaps in social services that left people falling through the cracks. She learned that there were never enough beds at the shelters, never enough resources to help everyone who needed it. She learned that many women chose dangerous situations over homelessness because at least dangerous situations came with a roof overhead. She learned that the system was broken in 1,000 small ways, and the people who needed help the most were the ones least likely to get it. Sarah thought about the trailer she lived in, and the property around it, and what else could be built there. She thought about the money Thomas's business was making and would make more of if she became a partner. She thought about taking her pain and turning it into something that could help others. One evening in late January, almost exactly a year after that night in the diner, Sarah asked Thomas if they could talk. They sat in his cabin, and she told him her idea. "I want to build more trailers on this property. Small ones, like the one I'm in, maybe even smaller. I want to create a place where women with children can stay when they have nowhere else to go. No questions asked, no judgments, just safe shelter while they figure out their next steps." Thomas listened carefully, his face thoughtful. "That's ambitious. I know. It would take money and time and permits and all kinds of things I haven't figured out yet. But I can't stop thinking about it. About how many women are where I was. How many children are going hungry because their mothers have run out of options." Sarah leaned forward. "You saved us, Thomas. You gave us a chance when we had nothing. I want to do that for others." "It's a good idea," Thomas said slowly. "A really good idea. But it's also a lot of work. You're already taking on more responsibility with the business. I'm not saying we do it tomorrow. I'm saying we start planning it. Figure out if it's even possible. Maybe in a few years when the business is more stable. When I've proven I can handle being a partner." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah held her breath, worried she'd overstepped, asked for too much. But when he looked up at her, his eyes were bright with something that looked like pride. "You know what? Let's do it. Let's figure it out together. We'll make it work." Sarah felt like she could fly. "Really? We'll need to talk to lawyers, get the zoning sorted out, figure out the finances. But yeah, let's build something that matters. Let's help people the way you were helped." They shook hands across the table, and Sarah felt like she was sealing something bigger than just a business agreement. She was committing to a vision of a future where her pain had purpose, where the worst moment of her life became the catalyst for helping others. Over the next months, Sarah and Thomas worked on 2 parallel tracks. During the day, she continued learning the business, taking on more client meetings, negotiating contracts, understanding the financial side of running a construction company. In the evenings and on weekends, they researched the transitional housing project, talking to lawyers and county officials, drawing up preliminary plans, crunching numbers to see what was possible. It was hard work, harder than anything Sarah had done before, but it was also fulfilling in a way she'd never experienced. She was building something, not just for herself and Danny, but for all the other Sarahs and Dannys out there who needed someone to believe in them. Danny thrived. He started kindergarten at the local elementary school, bringing home drawings and stories about his friends. He was reading simple books now, sounding out words with careful concentration. He had birthday parties to attend and playdates to schedule. He was a normal kid, living a normal kid's life. And every time Sarah saw him laugh or run or just be happy, she felt like she'd won the lottery. She and Thomas officially became partners in June, a year and a half after that night in the diner. They signed the papers in a lawyer's office, and Sarah's hand shook as she wrote her name, Begay and Mitchell Contracting. It was real. She was a business owner, a partner in a legitimate, profitable company. She, who'd been living in her car, who'd been ready to trade her body for meal money, was now someone with equity and responsibility and a future. The transitional housing project took longer. There were permits to obtain, regulations to navigate, funding to secure. But by the second year, they broke ground on the first 2 units. Small trailers, efficiently designed, each with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen. A safe place for a woman and her children to land while they got back on their feet. Sarah interviewed potential residents herself, and she knew exactly what to look for because she'd been there. She saw the desperation in their eyes, the shame, the fear. She saw herself in every woman who walked through the door, and she told each one the same thing. You're going to be okay. I know because I was where you are, and look at me now. You can do this too. The first woman they housed was named Jennifer, 25 years old, with twin daughters. 3 years old, she'd left an abusive husband with nothing but the clothes on her back. Sarah helped her settle in, showed her how everything worked, filled the cabinets with food, and when Jennifer cried and said she didn't know how to thank her, Sarah just hugged her and said, "Pay it forward someday. That's all I ask." By the 3rd year, they had 4 units, and all of them were occupied. Sarah had created a small fund to help residents with expenses, gas money for job interviews, work clothes from the thrift store, childcare during work hours. She connected women with social services, helped them navigate the bureaucracy, advocated for them when they needed it.
And she never forgot where she'd come from.
Every time she felt overwhelmed or questioned whether she was doing enough, she thought about that night in the diner. She thought about Thomas looking at her with kind eyes and refusing to take advantage. She thought about how one person's decision to help instead of hurt had changed everything. 4 years after that rainy Thursday evening, Sarah stood in the middle of the property and looked at what they'd built. 6 trailers now, all occupied, all housing women and children who were working their way back to stability. The contracting business was thriving, with more work than they could handle. Danny was 8 years old, happy and healthy and doing well in school. And Sarah was someone she could be proud of. Thomas walked up beside her, his limp more pronounced than it used to be, but his eyes as sharp as ever. Thinking deep thoughts? Just remembering. Sarah said, "Do you ever think about that night when I came into the diner?" "Sometimes," Thomas admitted. "Do you?" "All the time. I think about what could have happened if you'd been someone else. If you'd taken what I offered. But I didn't. No, you didn't. You gave me something better instead." Sarah turned to face him. "You gave me myself back, my dignity, my hope, my future. Everything I have, everything we've built. It started with you seeing me as a person instead of an opportunity." Thomas looked uncomfortable with the praise, the way he always did. "You did the hard work. I just gave you a place to do it. You gave me more than that. You showed me what kindness looks like, what it means to help someone without expecting anything in return." Sarah gestured to the trailers. "This exists because of what you did for me. Every woman we help, every child who gets fed and housed, that's your legacy too. It's your vision, Sarah, your heart. I just helped make it real." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunset over the red hills. Somewhere in one of the trailers, a child laughed. In another, a woman was probably cooking dinner for her family. Normal sounds, everyday sounds, but precious because they represented survival and hope and the chance to start over. Sarah thought about the woman she'd been, desperate and broken and ready to sacrifice everything for her child. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong and purposeful and using her pain to help others. The journey between those 2 versions of herself had been long and hard, but she'd made it. They'd made it. "Thank you," she said to Thomas, "not for the first time and certainly not for the last, for seeing me, for helping me, for everything." Thomas smiled, that gentle smile she'd come to know so well. For everything. And in that moment, standing on land they'd transformed into a place of hope, Sarah understood the full circle of what had happened. She'd walked into a diner offering herself, and Thomas had gently said, "Stay, I've got you both." And he had. He'd kept his promise in ways neither of them could have imagined. But more than that, Sarah had learned to say those words too. To every woman who came to their door, scared and desperate and out of options, Sarah could look them in the eye and say with complete honesty, "Stay, I've got you. You're going to be okay." Because someone had said it to her once, and it had changed everything. And now she got to pass that gift forward, over and over again, one woman and one child at a time. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it didn't fix the broken systems that created these situations in the first place. But it was something. It was hope and help and human kindness in a world that often had too little of all three. And it all started with one man who looked at a desperate woman and chose compassion over exploitation, who saw not what he could take, but what he could give. That was the real story. Not just about Sarah's survival or Thomas's kindness, but about what happens when people choose to help instead of hurt, when they see humanity instead of opportunity, when they give without expecting anything in return. It was a story about the power of one good choice to ripple outward and change lives far beyond the original moment. And it was a story that continued every day, in every woman they housed, every child they fed, every person they helped get back on their feet. The story that began in a diner on a rainy Thursday night didn't end. It just kept growing, kept spreading, kept proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can build into something extraordinary. Sarah had offered herself to feed her son, and Thomas had gently said he had them both. But what he really gave them was so much more than shelter and food. He gave them a future, a purpose, and a way to turn pain into hope. And that was the greatest gift of all.